Good afternoon. Abraham, I have a question. I've been listening to your tapes, and many years ago, almost 20 years ago, I had a profound non-physical experience. I was in a bombing and left my body and experienced a greater me. And ever since that experience, I've been altered, and I've been searching for a way to reconnect with that greater me. But I'm afraid that I'm thinking that in order to reconnect in that way, that somehow I have to be placed in physical danger in order for that to happen. And I guess I'm wanting to know, is there another way?
Describe the physical danger that you experienced the first time.
Oh, I was in a bombing. I was in a train station in Canada. And I was standing at a rent-a-car counter. And probably from me to you, there was a bank of lockers. And in that bank of lockers was a bomb. And I noticed that time stopped, just completely stood still. And as I looked around me, everything was motionless. And in very slow motion, I saw the door of the locker open, and this big ball of flame come rolling out in slow motion. And it was heading towards a line of people. This was a huge train station, like Grand Central Station. Heading towards a line of people who were waiting for their train. And I remained in my spot by the rent-a-car. My body remained in the spot by the rent-a-car counter. But who I was, that greater me, went up to the ceiling and observed the entire event from a higher altitude. And I started doing incredible calculations. And I'm someone who counts on my fingers, but I was doing incredible calculations. The time and the distance that it was going to take for the velocity of this explosion before it hit the far wall and came back and would catch me, and calculating whether or not there was enough time for me to send the adrenaline that needed to go to the muscles and to operate the body to get my body to an area of safety before all of this came back. And it was in lightning speed, but in very slow motion. And clearly I was able to get myself to a place of safety because I'm standing here today. And once I was in a place of safety, then this greater me just came right back into my physical body. But it was one of the most profound experiences that I've ever had in my life. And I've been searching for probably almost 20 years to reconnect in a way.
Well, we can understand why you would have mixed emotions about it, because you're saying on the one hand, it seemed to come in response to extraordinary need or asking. And I'm not sure that I ever want to put myself in that kind of extraordinary need or asking just to have the experience.
Exactly.
And the thing that we'd like to say to you, you're helping us to talk about this balance between my desire and my belief and expectation. Because if you really want something, even though you might not believe it, in a time or a moment of heightened desire, the desire can dominate the vibration of your being. In other words, well-being is always coming to you. It's what we refer to when you refer to quantum leaps. In other words, when you really want something, even if you don't believe it, if your desire is big enough and there is something that is happening in your moment that causes you to focus more singularly on the desire, then the desire part of your vibrational countenance dominates and it is answered, even though there may, under normal circumstances, be quite a bit of resistance. So what we would say to you as we are addressing you in your energy now, and as comparing the energy of your being then, Your desire was heightened, but there was more resistance within you then, but that's not the case anymore. In other words, over this period of time, you've released layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of resistance. So now subtle desires are easily answered for you.
Yes.
Another thing that is quite interesting about these extraordinary experiences that you have that are out of body in nature, you want to have them as physical humans because you want confirmation of a number of things. First, it helps you to know that there is more than just you. You had an undeniable experience. In other words, you will never again question the existence of that broader part of you.
Exactly.
And we think with remarkable clarity, you have the experience, and we're even able to translate it back into this time-space reality with great clarity and precision what was actually taking place. Time is just a perceptual thing, you see.
Yes.
And what you experienced is a little bit the way the universe sees circumstances and events. In other words, all kinds of things are orchestrated from that timeless vantage point. And so you did get a whiff of what non-physical is like, and you did an excellent job of translating it verbally, experientially, back into the physical time-space reality. The thing that we most want to say to you is that having had that experience answered that asking. It's sort of like you'll have an out-of-body experience. It usually comes early on when you first start meditating or when you first start consciously becoming into awareness that there is this broader perspective. And then oftentimes you don't keep repeating it over and over again. And the reason you don't keep repeating it over and over again is because you asked the question and the question was answered. And once you hold that knowing, you don't keep having to have that same answer come to you over and over and over again. Okay. So now, if we were standing in your physical shoes, we would begin to consciously formulate other questions, because the question is no longer within you. Does my inner being exist? Does that part of consciousness exist? Do I have access to it? You already know that. Now the question is a different one. It is, in what ways can I more effectively utilize my relationship with my inner being? Or can I, on a day-to-day basis, have that full conscious awareness come forth to me here? Yes. Also, your inner being is really not wanting you to jolt yourself from the consciousness of this time-space reality and view your world from that consciousness. That just happened over those experiences, and we don't think you're really reaching for that either. We hear you say, what I'm wanting to do is be fully present here in this physical body and have conscious fullness of that source energy expressing through me here. That's a whole different thing. That's not what happened then. What happened then was your consciousness raised and joined your broader non-physical being. Now what you're talking about is you allowing that broader consciousness to come forth to you here.
Yes.
It's really splitting hairs one way or the other, but it is quite a different question.
Yes, it is.
We do not think that you were ever in harm's way. We often say there are no near misses. In other words, you don't almost die. None of that happens. In other words, when it's your time to die, you die. And when it's not, you don't. Because those things are orchestrated from the energy alignment that has been set into motion long before the moment, which allows your escape or causes your reemergence into non-physical. And so don't worry about getting some intention going that sort of offsets that broader intention of living a long and healthy life experience. It's not going to happen to you. Also, we would not spend any time beating the drum of that experience, other than the aspect of it where you had that glorious experience of getting to view life from that broader perspective and understand in what good hands you really are.
It was actually quite wonderful.
Every death experience is, and even near-death experiences are. In other words, that's what it feels like, even if you had been one. We want to take a moment to describe this. We want to say to you that if this had been the moment that you had made your transition into non-physical, you still would have tasted the sweetness of all of that. In other words, the sweetness of that broader perspective, the sweetness of watching it all from a broader standpoint. And we want to say to you that even if that fireball had bounced off and come back and enveloped you, and it had been the time that your physical body would leave and you would withdraw into the non-physical, you would still be telling the story about how delicious delicious it was.
Yes.
Because in the moment that anything like that comes close, you do gain that broader consciousness. What you had was the experience of watching a death experience from the other side. Only the calculation was made that it was not to be your death experience. But even if it had been your death experience, these are the stories we hear all the time of murders and of bombs blowing up. In other words, from the non-physical perspective, we mean.
Yes.
In other words, there is no bad death experience. It's time to get over that.
Yes.
Yes.